The jungle stopped, not gradually, all at once. Staff Sergeant Carlos Hathcock pressed his cheek against the Winchester Model 70 and went completely still. The tree line below the ridgeline had been moving, leaves shifting, shadows repositioning, and then nothing. The birds were gone. The insects were gone. Khe Sanh held its breath. January 1968. Northern I Corps. An estimated 20,000 North Vietnamese soldiers were somewhere in those hills. The Marines inside the wire didn't know exactly where any of them were. The base was encircled. Route 9 was cut. Artillery from guns the Marines couldn't locate was killing men inside the wire every day. Everything coming in or going out came by air, and even the air was no longer safe. Hathcock and his scout snipers were the exception. They went out, into the tree lines, into the silence the enemy controlled. They had been eliminating NVA officers with such precision that the North Vietnamese command had reportedly changed its movement patterns entirely. The sniper program was working. Nothing else operating around that base was as effective at removing command capability from the enemy. Then the order came down. Stand down. Stop shooting. No explanation was given. Not then. Not in any document made publicly available in the decades since. What has emerged, in fragments, through the accounts of the men who received it and the gaps in the official record, suggests something military commands rarely acknowledge. The men who received that order obeyed it. They set their rifles down and watched through their scopes as identified targets moved freely through the valley below. Some of those men later directed the assaults that killed Marines at Khe Sanh.
Carlos Norman Hathcock II was born on May 20, 1942, in Little Rock, Arkansas. His family was poor in the way that rural Arkansas poor meant in the 1940s. No margin, no surplus, no safety net. He grew up hunting in the backcountry, not as a hobby, but as a contribution to the household. By the time he was a teenager, he was shooting with the kind of instinctive precision that only comes from years of necessity. The kind that develops when a missed shot means an empty plate. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1959 at 17. By the time he completed recruit training and advanced infantry instruction, it was clear to every senior Marine who worked with him that his ability to shoot was not simply a matter of training or technique. It was a matter of temperament. He was patient. He was still. He understood, at a level most men couldn't articulate, that the most important variable in long-range shooting was not the rifle or the ammunition or even the wind reading. It was time. The willingness to wait for the one moment when the shot was certain. In 1965, while serving stateside, Hathcock competed in the Wimbledon Cup, the National Long-Range Rifle Championship held annually at Camp Perry, Ohio. The competition involved firing at targets 1,000 yards distant. He won. He beat military and civilian marksmen from across the country. That year, by the most objective measure available, he was the best long-range shooter in the United States. He arrived in Vietnam in 1966, assigned to operate in the area around Da Nang and Chu Lai in I Corps. He was a staff sergeant, operating as part of the Marine Corps Scout Sniper program, a program built largely from scratch over the preceding 2 years, drawing on doctrine developed by men like Hathcock himself and codified into formal instruction at the Scout Sniper School at Da Nang. The school produced Marines who could stalk, conceal, range, and shoot at distances that conventional infantry doctrine didn't anticipate. Hathcock was both its product and, in many ways, its standard. His methods became known. He wore a white feather in the band of his bush hat, a personal signature he never concealed, visible and deliberate. The North Vietnamese army gave him a name, Long Trang. white feather. They placed a bounty on his head, the equivalent of approximately $30,000 American dollars, a figure so large for wartime Vietnam that it was understood as a statement of institutional priority. Multiple NVA sharpshooters were reportedly dispatched with the specific mission of locating and killing him. None of them came back. By late 1967, his confirmed kill count stood at 93. The official number required a witness for each engagement, a spotter or a second Marine who could corroborate the shot. The men who served alongside him understood the actual figure was higher. In complex terrain, with frequent night operations and long-distance engagements in weather that obscured observation, not every shot had a witness. The 93 is the documented minimum. In December 1967, the strategic situation in northern North Korea was shifting in ways that American intelligence was only partially tracking in real time. Reconnaissance teams operating west of Khe Sanh were reporting something that didn't fit the established pattern. North Vietnamese units were moving into the surrounding hills and staying, not transiting south along infiltration routes toward the coast, staying, building positions, caching supplies, emplacing crew-served weapons. The Khe Sanh combat base sat on a plateau in the shadow of the Dong Tri Mountains in western Quang Tri Province, 14 kilometers from the Laotian border and 35 kilometers south of the DMZ. Colonel David Lowndes commanded the 26th Marine Regiment, approximately 6,000 Marines and South Vietnamese Rangers holding a position surrounded on three sides by high ground. The base controlled Route 9, the main east-west road through the highlands. If Route 9 could be blocked and the base isolated, the western approach to the coastal lowlands of WWII was exposed. On the night of January 2, 1968, a Marine outpost on the western perimeter challenged 6 unidentified figures moving through the wire. 5 were killed. When daylight came and the bodies were examined, what the Marines found stopped the conversation cold. Among the dead was a North Vietnamese regimental commander and his operations officer and communications officer. 3 senior command personnel, personally conducting a forward reconnaissance of the Marine perimeter. That level of command investment in a forward recon mission meant only one thing. Something very large was being planned, and its architects were personally verifying the ground. 19 days later, the assault began. At 00:30 on January 21, 1968, rockets and artillery shells began impacting on Hill 861 to the northwest of the base. A full ground assault followed, repulsed after several hours of close combat. Then, at 05:30, a second barrage struck the base itself. A major ammunition dump exploded. A fuel storage area was destroyed. The blast was visible for miles. When news reached Washington, the phrase that appeared in cables was "Dien Bien Phu." Critics of the war began asking whether Khe Sanh could be held or whether it should be. General Westmoreland and General Cushman, commander of the 3rd Marine Amphibious Force, made their decision: hold the base. 2 North Vietnamese divisions committed to a siege at Khe Sanh were 2 divisions not participating in what was simultaneously beginning across South Vietnam, the Tet Offensive. The strategic logic was defensible. The cost of that logic would be paid by the men inside the wire. Carlos Hathcock was not inside the wire. He was in the hills above it. He had clear shots. He had been taking them. He had a shot. He had many shots. The question was whether he would be allowed to keep taking them. The sniper program at Khe Sanh was not part of the official fire support coordination structure. There was no dedicated operations cell tracking sniper missions in real time. There was no formal after-action reporting system that created the kind of documented record that artillery batteries and air squadrons generated automatically. What existed was a small number of Marine Scout sniper teams, graduates of the Da Nang School, trained in concealment, stalking, and long-range marksmanship, operating in the hills surrounding the base with a mission that was understood in practical terms even when it wasn't spelled out formally. The mission was to kill officers. Not because officers were more valuable lives than enlisted men, because officers were decision nodes. A North Vietnamese regimental commander who went down at 700 meters from a position that was never located represented not just one less soldier, but one less functioning part of the command structure massing for assaults. A dead operations officer was a gap in coordination that could not be quickly filled by a unit operating far from its support base with limited communications infrastructure. The Marine Scout snipers were not collecting trophies. They were selectively degrading the NVA's ability to plan and execute complex operations against the base. In the weeks following the January 21st assault, the results were measurable in ways that the men closest to the mission recognized before anyone at headquarters level documented them. NVA officers who had been moving in exposed positions near tree lines stopped moving in exposed positions. Assembly routes that had been used repeatedly began to shift. Attacks that the Fire Support Coordination Center anticipated from specific vectors at specific times came in differently, later, smaller, less coordinated than their preparation suggested they should have been. The sniper program was not the only variable producing those changes, but it was one of them, and it was the most cost-efficient one on the board. Hathcock operated in two-man teams, shooter and spotter, typically another qualified scout sniper. Together they established hides that Hathcock selected with the discipline of a man who had been doing this for years. Overlapping withdrawal routes, no movement pattern detectable from the air or from enemy observation posts, firing angles that minimized visible signature. The sound of a rifle at 600 meters carries. The muzzle flash is a data point. A sniper who fires and stays is a located sniper. A sniper who fires and moves is a ghost. He had survived this long by being a ghost. The intelligence picture around Khe Sanh in late January and early February 1968 was developing simultaneously on two axes. On one axis, the Fire Support Coordination Center was building a target grid, mapping NVA positions, registering artillery concentrations, preparing pre-planned fires that could be executed within minutes of a trigger. That picture was tactical, updated daily, and shared across the command structure at the base. On a second axis, American intelligence assets, signals intercepts, defector debriefings, human source reporting, were generating information about the NVA command structure at a level of specificity that was unusual for that phase of the war. Commander names, unit designations, movement schedules, the kind of detail that can only come from proximity to the decision-making process. That second picture was not widely shared. It was classified above the level that most Marine officers in the field would see. It was being processed by people who were not in Khe Sanh, and it was creating a problem. Every shot Hathcock took, every NVA officer killed at extreme range from an unlocated position, was an event that generated analysis on both sides. The Marines recorded confirmed kills. The NVA recorded unexplained deaths. An analyst on the NVA side, looking at a pattern of officer casualties concentrated in specific terrain at specific times, could begin to construct something more precise than there are snipers here. The pattern of who was dying, in what sequence, in what locations, could eventually suggest how American targeting was being informed, and if that targeting was informed by a source, the pattern could point toward the source. The decision to stand down the snipers was almost certainly made above the level of the 26th Marine Regiment. Colonel Lowndes would later describe his fire support decisions at Khe Sanh with considerable detail. He did not describe this decision. It doesn't appear in his accounts of the siege the way artillery missions and airstrikes appear. It appears in the accounts of the men who received it. and it arrives in those accounts without a reason attached.
The stand-down order reached Hathcock through his chain of command. The specific mechanism, whether it arrived as a written directive, a radio communication, or a face-to-face order from a superior officer, is not preserved in any document made publicly available. What is preserved, through the accounts recorded by military historian Charles Henderson in his biography of Hathcock, is that the order came and was not accompanied by an explanation adequate to the situation.
For a sniper, the logic of a stand-down is never neutral. A rifle in a hide is not simply a weapon held in reserve. It is a system requiring active maintenance, current knowledge of the terrain, the patterns of movement, the timing windows, the micro-environmental variables, wind, fog, temperature, ambient light, that determine whether a long-range shot is possible at any given moment. When you take a sniper out of operation, you don't press pause. You begin a process of erosion. The target picture he built through days of methodical observation begins to age. The specific individuals he had been tracking, their routes, their behaviors, their predictable appearances, begin to drift from the portrait he had assembled. The enemy, meanwhile, does not pause. In the days following the stand-down, North Vietnamese movement around the perimeter of Khe Sanh continued. The behavioral changes that sniper pressure had been producing, the route changes, the reduced exposure of command personnel, the tighter concealment during assembly, began to relax. Not completely, not immediately, but observably. Men who had stopped moving in the open began moving in the open again. The most plausible explanation for the stand-down, the one that fits the available evidence most consistently, is that it was connected to the intelligence picture developing in the background. If American intelligence had a human source embedded in, or closely connected to, the NVA command structure around Khe Sanh, the existence of that source would have been among the most tightly held pieces of information in the theater. A source's value was not only the information already collected, it was the information still to come, the ability to anticipate NVA intentions before they became operational actions. That value was finite. A source discovered was a source lost. A source lost was, in wartime, a source killed. The calculus of protecting that source against the immediate tactical value of continued sniper operations would have been made by people who could see both sides of the ledger. The Marines in the field could only see one side, the side that measured its cost in American lives. Here is what the official record does confirm. Beginning in early 1968, U.S. intelligence was receiving information about NVA command movements around Khe Sanh at a specificity considered extraordinary at the time. Some of that information appears in retrospect to have come from a source with direct access to NVA planning discussions. That kind of source is not protected by saying nothing. It is protected by controlling what American forces visibly do with the information it generates, ensuring that the pattern of American action does not make the source's existence deducible to the people trying to find it. Every dead NVA officer was a visible consequence of invisible information. Hathcock's stand-down in this reading was a decision to protect the source that was telling American commanders what was coming, at the cost of the immediate advantage of continuing to remove the commanders who were planning it. He was not told any of this. If this is what happened, he was not told. He found out what was coming the same way the Marines in the trenches found out, when it came through the wire. The ground assault that hit the eastern perimeter of Khe Sanh combat base in the final days of January 1968 was not a probe. It was a coordinated company-level assault with supporting weapons, crew-served machine guns, RPGs, mortar support from pre-positioned tubes, timed to exploit a gap in the Marines' illumination coverage, and executed with a discipline that required functioning officer-level command direction. Inside the Fire Support Coordination Center, the artillery response was already being calculated before the assault reached the wire. Lieutenant Colonel John Mitchell's 1st Battalion, 13th Marines, had registered every approach vector. 46 artillery pieces were connected through a coordination system that could put combined fire on a target within minutes of a call. 3 Marine batteries of 105 mm howitzers, a battery of 4.2-inch mortars, a battery of 155 mm howitzers. 4 Army batteries of 175 mm guns at the Rockpile and Camp Carroll to the east. The system was functional. The system was well coordinated. The system had been built for exactly this situation. The system could not replace what was not there. In the trenches on the eastern perimeter, the Marines who took the assault had been in position since darkness fell. They had been listening to movement in the tree line for over an hour. The sounds that experienced infantry learned to categorize. The metallic click of a weapon being handled. The weight shift rustle that means a body repositioning. The specific silence that follows when a formation stops to receive its final order. They had reported what they heard. The reports had gone up the chain. The Fire Support Coordination Center had responded with harassing fires along the most likely approach routes. The NVA came through anyway. The first incoming 82 mm mortar rounds hit the perimeter almost simultaneously with the ground assault. A coordination that indicated rehearsal, that indicated the men directing the attack had been in position for hours, that indicated the command structure of this assault was intact and functioning. The Marines in the forward positions went flat, brought their weapons up, called for illumination. The night lit in segments, flare pop, harsh white light over the wire, then the dark interval before the next round. In the light, the enemy went to ground. In the dark, they moved. The Marines learned the timing and tried to fire into the intervals. The enemy had learned the timing too. What the Marines in those trenches experienced in the next several hours was the specific texture of close combat in a fixed defensive position under coordinated assault. It is not adequately described by the phrase intense firefight. It is the experience of firing at shapes that appear and disappear in partial light, of hearing men dying at ranges measured in meters, not kilometers, of making decisions, hold or displace, fire or conserve, without complete information, without sleep, without certainty about what is happening 20 meters to your left. One Marine in a forward fighting position on the eastern perimeter fired his M16 until the barrel was too hot to hold, set it down, picked up the rifle of the man next to him, who had been hit, and kept firing. His account, recorded in the days after the battle, describes what he did in terms quieter than the event itself. We had a job to do, and we did it. That sentence, in the context of what it describes, is not understatement. It is the only frame that held. In the hills above the perimeter, in a position on the ridgeline north of the main assault route, Carlos Hathcock watched all of it. He was not idle. An observer in his position, watching an assault in progress, generates information, movement patterns, concentration points, command node locations, that has operational value. He reported what he saw. He had a functioning radio and a clear line of observation, and he used both. He did not fire. The assault was eventually stopped. The pre-planned fires from the coordination center, the direct fire weapons in the trenches, the close air support that arrived on the flanks as the assault developed, all of it functioned. 78 enemy bodies were recovered on the perimeter the following morning. Montagnard scouts in the surrounding hills reported finding stacked NVA dead in the tree lines, rows of bodies pulled there during the night by withdrawing units. The assault had failed. The Marines who held the perimeter that night had done something exceptional under conditions that offered them nothing easy. He had not been allowed to fire. Hathcock knew the positions those commanders had used to direct the attack. He had been watching them for weeks, building the target picture that a sniper builds through patient accumulation. He knew the routes they used, the timing of their movements, the terrain features they relied on. He had that picture completely in his head, and he had been ordered to do nothing with it. That knowledge, the specific, irreducible knowledge of what could have been stopped and was not, and why it was not, was something he carried for the rest of his life. Not as a complaint. He did not complain. He obeyed his orders. He reported his observations. He did what was asked of him. But he carried it in the way that men who have been through things like this carry them. Quietly, without adequate language, in the part of a person that doesn't have a name yet. What changed the game at Khe Sanh was not a single decision. It was accumulation. The fire support coordination system that Colonel Lowndes and Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had built inside the Combat Operations Center was, by the standards of Vietnam-era defensive operations, an integrated and sophisticated structure. 46 artillery pieces were managed through a single coordination center that controlled targeting, deconfliction, and timing for all supporting fires simultaneously. The center also integrated tactical air support and B-52 arc light strikes, managing the airspace over the plateau in a way that allowed multiple systems to operate without interference. The numbers generated by this system over the 66 days of the siege were significant. A daily average of 45 B-52 sorties and 300 tactical air sorties struck targets near the base. A total of 158,981 artillery rounds of various calibers were fired, approximately 2,400 rounds per day, sustained across the entire siege. But the number that mattered was not volume. It was accuracy. The Coordination Center developed two techniques during the siege that would become doctrinal references afterward. The Mini Arc Light combined two intruder tactical aircraft, each carrying 28 500-pound bombs, with coordinated simultaneous battery fires from multiple positions. Trajectory and flight times were calculated so that bombs and initial artillery rounds impacted at the same instant, saturating a 500 by 1,000 meter block. The micro arc light achieved similar saturation over a smaller area and could be organized and executed in under 10 minutes. Both systems were pre-planned, pre-registered, and ready to fire on order at any hour. They were not improvised responses. They were a pre-built architecture waiting for the right conditions. The decisive variable was weather. The NVA had planned the siege partly in anticipation of the weather patterns typical to western Quang Tri province in January and February. The Dong Tri Mountains in winter produced persistent fog, low cloud ceilings, and reduced visibility that degraded close air support and limited artillery observation. The January 21st assault had been timed in part with those conditions in mind. For the first weeks of the siege, the weather delivered what the NVA had anticipated. Aircraft were grounded or operating at reduced effectiveness. The cost in American fire support was measurable and real. March changed the equation. Beginning in early March 1968, the weather over the Khe Sanh Plateau shifted. The fog lifted. The ceilings rose. For all but 5 days in the entire month, observation was unrestricted. Forward observers on the surrounding hills could see the terrain with the clarity that fire support missions require. Counter-battery radars tracking NVA artillery positions were now corroborated by direct observation from Hill 881 South. B-52 arc lights planned against suspected positions could now be confirmed against observed ones. The integrated fire system that Lowndes and Mitchell had built over months of siege, a system calibrated for exactly this moment, was finally able to operate at its full designed capacity. The effect was immediate and measurable. U.S. intelligence began reporting an exodus of major NVA units from the battle area beginning in mid-March. Most of one division pulled back into Laos. The confirmed enemy dead in March increased by approximately 80% over the figures recorded in February. The NVA artillery that had shelled the base with relative impunity for weeks, 152mm and 130mm guns positioned southwest and northwest of the base, fell silent as counter-battery fires, now directed by observation rather than radar data alone, found them. On March 31st, the 1st Cavalry Division assumed operational control of the 26th Marine Regiment, beginning Operation Pegasus, the combined ground and airmobile operation that would officially relieve the siege. 31 artillery batteries would support the operation, the largest concentration of artillery assembled in support of a single operation in Vietnam to that date. By the time Pegasus launched on April 1st, the sniper restrictions that had silenced Hathcock's rifle were reduced. He was operating again, back in the hills, back behind the scope. The men he was watching now were not the same men he had been watching in January. Many of those men were dead, from artillery, from the sustained attrition of 60 days of failed assaults, from the airstrikes and counter-battery fires that the clearing weather had finally made possible. Not from his rifle. Not because he had been stopped, but from the same war that stopped him. The official numbers for the Battle of Khe Sanh are precise without being complete. American killed in action, 274 confirmed dead during the siege from January 21 to April 8, 1968. Wounded in action, 2,541. Those numbers represent what was counted inside the wire. The Marines and soldiers who died on the base itself, on the surrounding hills, on the helicopters trying to reach them, in the aid stations where the medevac flights ended. They don't include the men who came home and died of what they carried back. They don't include the men who survived and spent the following decades not surviving. North Vietnamese losses were never accurately tallied. American estimates ranged from 10,000 to 15,000 killed during the siege. Those figures are probably accurate in magnitude and imprecise in specifics. The NVA did not preserve casualty records in forms that became accessible after the war, and the terrain around Khe Sanh absorbed evidence in ways that made post-battle accounting permanently incomplete. What was counted was what was found. What was found was a fraction of what was there. For the Marines who held the perimeter, the numbers were an abstraction that arrived later. What existed in the moment, and in the years after, was specific. The face of the man next to you, whether that face was still there at first light. The base was officially relieved on April 8, 1968. Elements of the 1st Cavalry Division and the South Vietnamese 3rd Airborne Task Force linked up with the 26th Marine Regiment on the plateau after 6 days of Operation Pegasus. The Marines who had been inside the wire since January watched the men coming up Route 9 and felt something that multiple accounts describe as something other than simple relief. They had done what they were told to do. They had held what they were told to hold. Whether what they had held was worth what it had cost to hold it was a question the men coming up the road couldn't answer for them. Colonel Lowndes received the Navy Cross. The 26th Marine Regiment received the Presidential Unit Citation. The fire support coordination methods developed at Khe Sanh were incorporated into subsequent doctrine and studied at military schools for years. The defense of Khe Sanh was presented, in official summations, as a demonstration of what combined arms firepower could accomplish against a superior force. By July 1968, the Khe Sanh combat base was abandoned. General Westmoreland, who had ordered it held, was reassigned to Washington in June. His successor, General Creighton Abrams, determined the base no longer served a strategic purpose. The decision was made at the same level that had made the decision to hold it, well above the level of the men who had held it. The base was dismantled, the bunkers were demolished, the runway was cratered, the wire was cut. Route 9, reopened at significant cost during Pegasus, was closed again almost immediately afterward. The ground was given back to the jungle. Carlos Hathcock left Vietnam in 1969. His confirmed kill total remained 93. He was never awarded the Medal of Honor, despite actions that multiple officers believed qualified, including a solo penetration of enemy-controlled territory to eliminate an NVA general, a mission documented in detail by Henderson, and considered by those familiar with it to be among the most extraordinary individual acts of the Vietnam War. He received the Silver Star, several Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart following a 1969 incident in which his vehicle struck a landmine and he pulled 7 burning Marines to safety, suffering severe burns to more than 40% of his body. He was medically evacuated and never returned to combat.
Back in the United States, he developed multiple sclerosis in 1975. He continued to teach Scout Sniper doctrine to Marine Corps recruits for as long as his health permitted. He was one of the most influential figures in the development of the modern Marine sniper program. The men he trained became the trainers of the men who followed. He died on February 23, 1999, at 56 years old.
His obituary in the Marine Corps Gazette described him as the most effective combat sniper in American military history. The order that silenced his rifle during the siege of Khe Sanh was never entered into his service record. It was not discussed in the official histories of the battle. It exists in the accounts of the men who received it, and in the space in the record where an explanation should be and isn't. He never received that explanation. Neither did the Marines who died while he was under orders to watch. The question that the Battle of Khe Sanh leaves, the one this story has been building toward, is not the one that most histories ask. Most histories ask whether it was worth it, whether 274 American dead and more than 2,000 wounded were justified by the ground held, the NVA divisions tied down, the strategic position maintained. Those questions have been addressed with varying degrees of honesty by the people who made the relevant decisions and the historians who examined them afterward. They are real questions. They have partial answers. They have been debated for more than 50 years without resolution, because the calculus of war doesn't close cleanly. It leaves remainders. The question this story asks is narrower and harder. If a stand-down order was given, and it was given, the accounts of the men who received it are consistent and specific, and if that order was connected to an intelligence asset whose existence could not be acknowledged, and whose protection was judged to be worth more than the immediate tactical advantage of continued sniper operations, then the decision was made by someone who could see both sides of a ledger that the Marines inside the wire could not see. That is not inherently wrong. Intelligence decisions are structured that way. The people with the most critical information are rarely the people paying the most direct price for the decisions that information produces. But the question this configuration of events generates, the one that the available documentation does not answer, is not whether the decision was rational. It is whether the source was worth it. Not in the abstract, where the answer is always yes. Intelligence assets are by definition considered valuable enough to protect, or they would not be protected. But in the specific, did the information provided by whatever source generated the stand-down order ultimately save more lives than the stand-down cost? Did the advanced knowledge of NVA intentions obtained through that source enable responses that prevented losses greater than those suffered at the eastern perimeter in January 1968? The records that would answer that question have not been made public. They may have been destroyed. They may remain classified. They may have existed only in the minds of people who have since died. What remains is the gap. The place in the official history of Khe Sanh where the snipers went quiet and no one wrote down why. General Westmoreland called it a victory. The Marine Corps cited the fire support coordination as a doctrinal success. The 26th Marine Regiment received its citation. The histories were written. The men who held the perimeter on those nights, who spent them in the red clay, in the dark, firing at shapes while the man who could have stopped the assault from reaching them was under orders to watch, were never told what trade had been made on their behalf. Was the trade justified? Was the decision made by someone who understood what it would cost and was willing to pay it with someone else's life? Or was it simply what war produces, a decision made under pressure with incomplete information by people doing the best they could, that turned out to be both necessary and insufficient at the same time? There is no clean answer. There rarely is in a story like this one.
There are no clean answers in a story like this one. There rarely are. The men who served at Khe Sanh did what they were ordered to do. Under orders they didn't write. In a war they didn't start, for objectives that kept shifting. When the siege was over and the base was torn down, they came home to a country still arguing about whether any of it had been worth it. They never got to stop carrying that question. Not really. Not inside. If this story raised something that stayed with you, not just as history, but as something more personal, the description of this video has resources for the ones still carrying those questions in their bodies, not just their minds.